In his first State of the Union address, President Biden focused on Ukraine, inflation, the COVID-19 pandemic, voting rights legislation, and abortion rights.
Tonight, President Biden's agenda is expected to cover a wide range of topics, from the state of the economy to battling inflation to U.S. job growth. Earlier today, our Terrence Friday and Rochelle Graham spoke with CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland and asked what he thinks will be on the president's agenda tonight.
And here is some of what he had to say.
A unique balancing act he's going to have to master tonight, talking about accomplishments over the past few months, accomplishments for which the White House doesn't believe they're getting full credit, but also has to chart some new initiatives. That is, after all, part of the mission of a State of the Union address. We expect there to be some discussion of the infrastructure bill that passed late last year, that CHIPS Act, which the administration says will bring some semiconductor jobs to the U.S., and also efforts to boost jobs numbers. We've seen some good jobs numbers over the past few months. We also expect some discussion of abortion rights, gun control, police reform, maybe some talk about fentanyl overdoses, reducing those numbers. It's all a balancing act, but we can say with certainty, as is often the case, a lot of people think these speeches go too long, and there's a lot to jam in.
And to help discuss some of those topics President Biden will speak upon, we're joined by two guests with deep knowledge of American politics.
To your left, we've got former Democratic State Senator and Director of the Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency, Adam Hollier. Thanks for joining us.
And GOP strategist Jamie Roe, founder of Team Roe. Gentlemen, welcome. And Jamie, let's start with you tonight. How do you think President Biden's speech will be different this time around compared to his first one?
Well, the biggest difference is going to be that it's going to be Kevin McCarthy, the new Speaker of the House, sitting behind him instead of Nancy Pelosi. And that should send the message that the answer to every problem isn't more and bigger government spending, because he's not going to be able to get it through the House of Representatives. So he is going to have to understand that now, not only do you have a blunt to your effort to get ever bigger government, you also have a check on your administration, because you're going to get real oversight from this Republican Congress. So if I were President Biden, what I would be trying to do is build bridges. How do you find ways to make common ground? People like Kevin McCarthy coming out right now and telling him that there's going to be no deal making on the debt limit increase. And I spent 13 years on Capitol Hill working for Congresswoman Candace Miller back in the day, and I can tell you what, you're not going to be able to get a free check on the debt limit. So the president's got a tall task tonight, and he's got new challenges that he has not had to face in his first 2 years.
This could also serve as a messaging test. Adam, do you expect to hear anything tonight that points to what we can expect for Biden's re-election campaign?
I think the president is going to talk about all the incredible things that have happened, right? When we were dealing with this last year, we were talking about all the deaths that we were having from COVID-19. And today he's going to be able to talk about the job well done, how people have gotten vaccinations, how we're moving forward, and how people are starting to get back to normalcy. But even more, all the jobs that people are going to have, all the ways that our economy has grown. And people recognize that. Sure, people like to talk about the stock market, but when you talk about people's personal finances, most people are doing much better this year than they were last year. And I expect the president to talk a great deal about the expansion in that protections, but also all the work that he's done for the things that matter most to people across this nation.
What do you think Biden needs to address? What is there something that you would say the number one agenda needs to be? Is it the economy? Is it the inflation? Where would you say?
Well, I mean, the economy and inflation are the exact same thing. And when you talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, when you talk about all the work that's been done, the president is going to talk about the successes that people are really feeling. At this time last year, we were talking about gas prices in every second of every discussion. And now people don't talk about it as much because gas prices have gone back down because of the decisions that have been made. And I think the president is going to be able to really hamper and talk about those successes because regular people are doing it, right? He's going to talk about childcare. I have 2 little kids, and the cost of childcare is going down because of the work that the president has done. And access to pre-K is incredibly important, and you see spaces moving.
So in addition to those economic topics, we do expect him to comment on foreign policy. The most recent headline being the Chinese spy balloon we've all heard so much about over the past few days. He's taken a lot of heat from Republicans about the way he chose to respond to that.
Well, I've heard him take heat from Democrats too, that like Senator Tester from Montana, who was none too happy that this balloon was allowed to fly over his state. I heard an interview earlier today with Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, who was also upset about it. And the fact of the matter is it was indicative of this president's refusal to assert American sovereignty over our own territory. The fact that a balloon launched by a hostile power, a spy balloon launched by a hostile power, was allowed to go from the Aleutian Islands in Alaska across Canada and through the entirety of the United States is simply unbelievable. And you combine that with the fact that we have a southern border right now which is wide open. And people question this president's priorities when it comes to our national security. And you know, that balloon should have been shot down over the Aleutian Islands.
Yeah, but didn't it come down to a safety issue as far as people on the ground potentially getting injured?
You could have shot it down over the Aleutian Islands in Alaska before it ever reached the continent of North America. It was in our airspace in Alaska and was allowed to fly over the entirety of our country, and that is simply unacceptable by most Americans. So I think that the president has a lot of explaining to do on that front, and their story has changed about 10 times since his first. I mean, they were hoping that nobody would even notice and they would just let it pass by, but people in Montana, you know, looked up in the sky and all of a sudden they had a problem to deal with. And yeah, I'll be interested, very interested to see how he handles it tonight, but he's got some explaining to do.
Adam, do you think the Chinese balloon or Ukraine is a more pressing foreign policy issue
There's
tonight?
no question Ukraine is a more pressing policy. I mean, and last year we were all talking about how hopeful we would be if Ukraine was able to last 30 days or a week or 2 weeks. But because of the leadership of this president, the largest country in the world invaded the largest country in Europe, and it has been a conflict largely held to two nations. And so when you talk about the expansion of our role, and as a military officer myself, right, like I was at drill this weekend as we're talking about these issues, our nation and our defense are incredibly strong, we are incredibly resilient, and we are operating at a time where most Americans do not want to see us moving into another conflict, and President Biden has adeptly handled exactly that. But let's be honest, everyone is making this big deal about a spy balloon, but nothing that they could see from that balloon was not visible from satellites in space or any of those kind of things. So when we talk about it, this was largely an optics thing, and I think the Chinese government pushing right ahead of that visit.
When you look at what President Biden's going to potentially talk upon tonight in his second State of the Union address, when you look at the overall picture, how much can he help himself here or hurt himself when you talk about re-election?
I think President Biden is in a strong situation, right? As we look at the roaring ability of the economy, the way that as a nation we've rallied around voting rights and access, President Biden is going to be able to talk about all those things, but most importantly, he's going to be able to talk about how regular people's lives have gotten better because of all the manufacturing jobs that we see here in Michigan. You know, you see the impact of the CHIPS Act, you see domestic manufacturing, and going back to the discussion about China, you see him taking bold leadership in making sure that things are produced here in the United States, that technology is denied to a foreign power that has shown hostile intent. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities to say, hey, this is how we deal with national defense going forward, and this is how it benefits our economy.
There's a lot of talk of bipartisanship, of course, with Congress split right now. What about the factions within the parties themselves, starting with the Democratic Party? Do you expect to see more unity going forward?
I think the Democratic Party has always been incredibly unified, and you see that in the way that former Speaker Pelosi managed her caucus. She didn't bring things up to the floor and then get voted down. She didn't have to get 7 or 10 elections to do that. The same way that you saw that with Congressman Jeffries, the new leader of the Democratic Party. Like, folks are ready and committed to getting things done, and President Biden has shown a commitment to bipartisanship, I think unmatched amongst modern presidents.
Now, how about in the conservative, the Republican Party? We've already heard assurances sort of from Speaker McCarthy that there won't be any antics, you could say. Are you expecting to see more unity?
I think what you're going to see under Speaker McCarthy that you never saw under Speaker Pelosi is something called regular order, where members of Congress are allowed to debate, amend, and put their imprint on legislation, particularly government spending. I worked on Capitol Hill for 13 years, and appropriations bills were always allowed to be amended, right? On the floor, they amend all day long. And under Nancy Pelosi, the bill got sent to the floor, you voted on it, nobody could amend it, nobody could question it, and that is not a virtue, in my opinion. The other thing that they're gonna find is unity on the Republican side, that there are no more blank checks. Like Ukraine, for instance, we've spent nearly $100 billion on Ukraine already from the United States Treasury, and that is going to have to be justified. One thing I'd like to see the president talking more about is peace, Not about more war or how we pile more arms in there, but is there a way to help bring peace to Ukraine? And peace doesn't have to be just destroying the enemy. It can be negotiating and coming to a peace that ends this conflict and takes away the demand that's been placed on the American taxpayer. We're 30-something trillion dollars in debt right now. We do not have the ability to fund a war in Ukraine forever. And I understand the idea of not wanting it to spread to other parts of Europe. Best way to do that is to bring peace.
We'll be right back. More with Adam as well as Jamie. We're back after this.
CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Macomb County. Hi, we're CBS News Detroit. But we don't just cover the news here. We're also here, and everywhere in between. You know, the places you live, work, and play in Southeast Michigan. We're talking less of this, and more of the stories that actually matter to you.
CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock.
That's right, local news just found a home in your neighborhood. We're CBS News Detroit, live, streaming, and on demand. Nice to meet you. CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Wayne County. CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Monroe County.
CBS News Detroit, the stories you care about.
Live, streaming, and on demand. We're on your block, around the clock.
Southeast Michigan news whenever you want it.
We live here. We work here.
From North Branch to Southgate.
East Point to Westland.
Wherever you live, we're here for you.
Making a difference in your neighborhood.
CBS News Detroit, live, streaming, and on demand. Building a better newscast, one story at a time.
CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Oakland County.
How would you build the newscast of the future?
Expect the unexpected.
CBS News Detroit.
CBS News Detroit.
Southeast Michigan news whenever you want it.
We're ready to go live from your community.
Anywhere, anytime.
Live streaming and on demand.
That's the name of the game.
We are ready.
CBS News Detroit, in your neighborhood. Live, streaming, and on demand. Once again, we are joined tonight by former Democratic State Senator Adam Hollier and GOP strategist Jamie Roe. We're talking about President Biden's second State of the Union address. We're getting ready about an hour and a half away from now. And one of the traditions at every State of the Union are the guests, the special guests brought by members of Congress and seated in the First Lady's box. Two of the guests tonight, Adam, will be Tyree Nichols' mother and stepfather. What kind of message do you think it will send to have them attending tonight?
I'm a black man in America, and we are still talking about what it's like to deal with police violence. I think it's saying something that when this happens, it's national news and it's something that's relevant to the president. The unfortunate issue continues to be that it's constantly happening in the news. I'm hopeful that this is a continued effort by the Biden-Harris administration to see real meaningful change in this issue. And I think you're starting to see that. There was a time when I was growing up where it meant nothing was going to happen. And now you see the President of the United States saying, these are the people who I want to bring because this is the story that I want to elevate. This is who we want to be talking about. So I think it means a lot to a lot of families and a lot of people. It's just nowhere near enough yet.
Do you think there's anything that President Biden can say tonight with his mother, with his stepfather in attendance, that can help people that have lost trust in police trust law enforcement again?
Yeah, I mean, let's hope so, because I think one thing, everybody who saw that video is repulsed by it. And that type of policing isn't policing, that's, criminal activity. Those guys should be convicted of murder, and my guess is that they will be. Let's hope that they find some healing on that, because I think that is one issue where we can all agree on has no place in our society.
Another special guest tonight will be Paul Pelosi, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, who has recovered from the attack in their home in San Francisco. What message do you think that will send to have a victim of political violence present?
Yeah, I think that Paul Pelosi was attacked by a sick individual who also needs to be sent to prison or get the help that he needs. We all need to tone down the rhetoric a little bit, I think. It didn't help when President Biden was out there talking about ultra-MAGA Republicans who wanted to do whatever and tried to disparage anybody who had ever supported the former president. There's a lot of good people supported Donald Trump, okay? And I like to think I'm one of them. I voted for him twice, and we need to tone down the rhetoric a little bit so we bring more peacefulness to our discourse. Adam Hollier and I, we don't agree on a lot of issues, but we do agree on a lot. We had a nice conversation here beforehand discussing different ways that we can change certain things. And we did so in a constructive and positive manner. And I think we need more of that. Paul Pelosi, one thing with him I just simply don't understand is why they didn't release that video on day one. Because I think that not releasing it allowed for a lot of really bad speculation to take place. And I'm glad they finally did release it, because it did show that he is nothing but a victim in that circumstance.
Many people do believe that his attacker was motivated by the rhetoric of many people who will be in the room tonight, sitting members of Congress. Do you expect that rhetoric to change at all?
I'll just remind everybody of this. When I worked out in Washington, I think it was in 2014, 2015, a Bernie Sanders supporter, came to congressional baseball practice, Republican congressional baseball practice, and tried to murder people from Mike Bishop, who was our congressman from here in Oakland County, was on that field, and shot Steve Scalise, the majority whip, at the time, and almost killed him. Political violence isn't on one side or another. Now, the one thing about the Republicans, including Steve Scalise, who got shot, he never blamed Bernie Sanders for it, never blamed him. And I think that there's a lot of sick people in this country, and they may glom onto whatever reason to take out some dastardly action. And it isn't always the other side's total fault for how people who are sick react to certain things that are said in the course of politics.
What do you think former President Trump's response will be tonight? He's expected to release a response. I mean, I know we're speculating what Biden potentially is going to talk about, but for former President Trump.
I can't even begin to imagine what the former president is going to say. People get in trouble for trying to predict the weather poorly, and I couldn't imagine. I mean, President Trump says what he wants to say, when he wants to say it, and it's usually about him. And so I imagine it will be something focused on him and how he's being investigated or whatever. I think we should be talking about how we're going to move the nation forward. I think that's what President Biden is going to be talking about. I think that's what people want to hear and what we need to be talking about as we move forward as a nation and as a country. And I think that has very little to do with the former president.
And along those lines, it's so important for President Biden to bring the country together. Do you feel like we're at a point right now where he needs to unify this country?
The only way you can unify a nation is by getting things done, right? We look back at people in the past and say that they were unifiers. In the time, people said that they were dividers, right? We think about Abraham Lincoln as the great unifier, but in his moment, in his time, people were like, he couldn't be pushing people further and further away. History judges you on how you've unified by the results. And President Biden is going to talk a lot today about the results of his time as president. And I think people are going to be surprised and grateful for his leadership over the last 2 years. I know I am.
I do want to circle back to the response, to the official response from former Trump press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, now a governor. I'm curious to hear what you both think that choice in giving her that platform says about the future of the GOP, starting with you, Adam.
I think the whole response thing is kind of a strange space. I know a number of people are trying to manage their own risk because they think it was going to be the launching pad that it hasn't been. And I think it has fallen flat a number of years in the past. So by picking Governor Huckabee, that they figure, hey, that's someone safe who they think is not going to embarrass the party. But it might also be an opportunity for them to try and find another candidate for a Republican presidential election. Who knows? I think they're going to be struggling.
Yeah, I think that the official response is always one of the worst jobs in politics, because the president gives the speech on such a grandiose stage with all the applause and all the audience and all the guests that it's hard to measure up to it. I think Governor Sanders is a great choice in that she's the youngest governor in America. She's a young mother. She has young children who are she's bringing, her and her husband are bringing up right now. And I'm for one interested to hear what she has to say and what her response is and what the vision she wants to offer is. But she's a pretty sharp woman, so I think she'll do a great job.
Let's go back to the economy for a second. You spoke upon President Biden earlier. Things are improving. But a CBS News poll revealed the majority of Americans believe the Biden administration is making the economy worse. What would you say to people that believe that?
I graduated from college in 2007. It was almost impossible for people to find a job. We have a 3% unemployment rating right now. When so many of my friends are able to find a job, are moving, are looking, they have multiple options and are being recruited and trying to be retained. The job market is very different today than it was. Certainly the economy is never perfect, but there's a lot more support for working families. Childcare has been cheaper and more affordable under the Biden administration, and those are the kind of things that matter to young families like myself, right? We're moving forward. Do we have a lot left to do? Absolutely. And I think President Biden is going to continue to unveil and talk about big ways that we can see that kind of change around more domestic manufacturing, more high-tech manufacturing, and moving those things forward.
All right. We are going to take a quick break. We will be right back with some final thoughts from Adam and Jamie.
CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Macomb County. Hi, we're CBS News Detroit. But we don't just cover the news here. We're also here, and everywhere in between. You know, the places you live, work, and play in Southeast Michigan. We're talking less of this, and more of the stories that actually matter to you.
CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock.
That's right, local news just found a home in your neighborhood. We're CBS News Detroit, live, streaming, and on demand. Nice to meet you. CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Wayne County. CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Monroe County.
CBS News Detroit, the stories you care about.
Live, streaming, and on demand. We're on your block, around the clock.
Southeast Michigan news whenever you want it.
We live here. We work here.
From North Branch to Southgate.
East Point to Westland.
Wherever you live, we're here for you.
Making a difference in your neighborhood.
CBS News Detroit, live, streaming, and on demand. Building a better newscast, one story at a time.
CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Oakland County.
How would you build the newscast of the future?
Expect the unexpected.
CBS News Detroit.
CBS News Detroit.
Southeast Michigan news whenever you want it.
We're ready to go live from your community.
Anywhere, anytime.
Live streaming and on demand.
If that's the name of the game.
We are ready. CBS News Detroit, in your neighborhood. Live, streaming, and on demand.
Welcome back. Once again, we're joined by Democratic candidate Adam Hollier and GOP strategist Jamie Roe. And gentlemen, should the American people be optimistic or pessimistic about President Biden's speech tonight?
I don't know about President Biden's speech tonight. I'd be optimistic about the future of our country simply because America is always looking toward the future and toward a brighter future. And we have to, I think we all should have that type of optimism. But I think if we're waiting for President Biden to take on the serious challenges, I hope he takes on the serious challenges that we face, starting with securing our southern border. We simply cannot have a wide open southern border that's allowing fentanyl and other illicit drugs to come in that are poisoning our children in this country, and that has got to stop. And I think if there's one place where he could find bipartisan support is if he really wanted to try and get tough on sealing up our southern border. Let's hope that he comes up with an idea like that we can all agree on.
Working families. I'm optimistic, right? The president's going to be talking about how he's going to make lives for working families like the one I grew up in better, making prescription drug prices go down, really pushing to make it more affordable so that you have the coverage that you need in a time where people are really struggling and will continue to struggle, right? Like we talked about the Great Recession, right? Like student loan issues are really coming to heal for folks. And the president, I'm sure, is going to continue to talk about the work that he's done to make sure that people can afford to pay back the education that we know that we need to be competitive going forward. That's the competitive advantage that our nation has, and people are optimistic because they're going to have more opportunities. And they're going to have more opportunities because this president and this country are moving forward on manufacturing, which has always made our nation great, and making sure everyone has education and healthcare access. I'm excited.
To close things out, I'd like to know what you both think will be, for lack of a better word, the distraction tonight. We've heard there won't be any antics, there won't be any shouting, but amid all the pomp and circumstance, what do you think Twitter is going to be aflame with tonight?
Yeah, I think that's a little difficult to predict. I remember one time when I was working on Capitol Hill, the sweetest, kindest man I've ever seen in my life, named Joe Wilson, congressman from South Carolina, yelled out, "You lie," at President Obama. And I remember talking to his chief of staff afterward, and he raised a bunch of money online. He's like, "I'd give back every penny if we could give that moment back," because it was so out of character for that good man. So I don't know. I'm sure there will be something, but who knows?
I think there are going to be a lot of Nancy Pelosi memes, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is she looking like? What is she doing? And angry Kevin McCarthy. I think the Congressman Santos stuff is going to continue to be an issue. But I think by and large, people are going to be talking about the successes that this president has had and are going to be a little bit surprised as they say, "Oh, wow, that happened too?" Okay. That's what I'm going to be talking about. That's what I'm excited about. And I think that's what most of the American public is going to be talking about.
All right, we will find out shortly.
Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us tonight. Our special guests,
Thank you.
Adam as well as Jamie, we appreciate you joining us tonight in studio.